I'm Lydia Strachan. I'm the founder and director of a relatively new charity called Confident Conversations. We've been in operation for just over a year. We launched last January. And we are primarily a group of parents with lived experience of their children being in hospital, with a few health professionals to sort of bring that slightly different perspective. But we are an independent organisation, independent to sort of NHS structures and bureaucracies. And it's very important to us that we are when it comes to representing parents' voices and supporting parents. So our goal is to help all parents in hospital become partners in their child's care. And we do that primarily in three ways at the moment. So the first is we looked at the parent journey through hospital, so from admission to discharge and everything in between. And we have provided what we sort of informally call a handbook, a set of information around what happens at each of those stages of the journey, what's going on around you, who you might come into contact with, and how to manage that. The second thing we've done is we have brought together the lived experience of a range of parents who've spent time in hospital with their children. So some with long-term conditions, some just with children who've ended up in hospital. And we've distilled their experience of surviving in a hospital environment. So how do you manage your mental health? How do you manage relationships? What do you do if you have other siblings that need to be looked after? How do you manage family and friends? Everything that you can imagine that sits around the experience of being in hospital and how you cope with that. And then finally, we signpost to further support. So for example, obviously, because I'm here, the MMF information on parents and supporting parents in hospital is one of the bits of extra support that we signpost to. So this is broadly what I'm going to be talking about today. My own experience and how that's informed the charity, what it is like to be in hospital as a parent, and what we as a charity know about that experience. So not just my personal experience, but what we know. And then for you, what have we learned about what parents want from health professionals and how to develop good relationships with them? So this is my eldest, Hester. This is moments after she was born. She was born, as you'll see, a little on the early side and very small, with an antenatal diagnosis of tricuspid atresia, which for those of you who aren't cardiologists is a univentricular condition. So she has essentially half a working heart. She had a couple of other things going on as well with her heart that weren't particularly helpful. And then she developed intrauterine growth restriction during my pregnancy. So she came out early and she came out small with a heart condition. Coincidentally, I was sort of perfectly placed for a situation like this in terms of understanding and interpreting a hospital environment, because my professional background is diplomacy and government communications. So I have been trained for years to go into foreign environments, understand the language, understand the hierarchies, understand the culture, figure out how to get what I want, and then communicate that to other people. So ending up in hospital with a child with a heart condition who spent a great deal of time, as you might imagine, sedated and very unwell, gave me an awful lot of time to explore the hospital environment, to build relationships with people, and to learn as much as I could. This is Hester's medical history in brief. I won't go through it in detail, but just to highlight, we ended up spending 16 months in hospital when she was first born. She had 5 surgeries, some of them open heart, and many more sort of invasive diagnostic procedures. And we spent the entirety of the 16 months bouncing between PICU and HDU. We never made it onto the ward before she came home. And then, of course, after discharge, that's not the end of the story for Hester, unfortunately. Since then, she has had 3 further surgeries, and again, many more sort of invasive diagnostic and surgical tests. And we're not done. You know, for those of you who know anything about heart conditions, Hester's is a condition that can be palliated but not fixed. So she has another couple of surgeries scheduled over the course of her life. And we left hospital with some long-term impacts. So she came home with a tracheostomy, with a gastrostomy, with fine and gross motor function delay, and very sadly having had a right hand amputation after the blood supply to her arm failed when she was a baby. And this is just an overview of all of the various specialists that we as her parents have had to engage with since she came out of hospital. And the point to all of this is partly to share with you some of my personal experience and where I have come from, but also to stress to you that there are many parents that you will meet in hospital who have had previous experience of being in hospital. Most of them will not have had quite the dramatic experience that we have had. But it is worth bearing in mind that when you meet parents in hospital, many of them come with past trauma or past stress from previous admissions, as well as the stress of the current admission that they're going through. Now, I can talk fairly pragmatically about my experiences now. Hester is now 8. She is brilliant. And she was actually actively involved in helping me write this presentation. So we now feel fairly distant from those experiences. But as you can imagine, it was an incredibly difficult time for us as a family. And even with a huge amount of support, including professional therapy, I still have residual trauma responses when we have to go back into hospital. The beeping on ventilators, the ventilator alarms is what does it for me. But every parent who has had a child in hospital before brings that experience back into a new hospital admission. And this is the bit that Hester wanted me to share with you. Hester is not the list of medical diagnoses that I gave you, and she is not all the surgeries that has happened to her. She is so much more than that. She is an entire whole person. She wanted you to know that she loves her friends and her little sister. She loves playing with her Barbies. Her favorite Disney movie is Encanto. And her favorite subject at school is PE. And it was very important to her that you know that she is a very real person and not just a set of medical issues. And that's the point. That's the point of all of this, is that the medical condition that you see and that you want to fix, the reason that the child in front of you is in hospital, is not the whole story. And if you take away anything from this talk, what I want you to take away is that you should not make the mistake of only seeing the diagnosis in front of you, and that every single child that you see in hospital is a whole child with a life outside of hospital, with family, with friends, and with a life to live that they want to get back to. So when we were planning the charity, there was very little research on parental experience in hospital. There is still very little research on parental experience in hospital. So we did our own. Intuitively, we all know, parents and health professionals, that relationships between parents and health professionals and communication between them can be difficult. But what we wanted when we were founding the charity was some kind of an evidence base to be able to prove that. So we did a survey in 2021 of just over 100 parents from across the UK who had been in hospital with their child over the last 5 years. 54% of them had been in hospital more than 5 times in that period. The group skewed towards people with younger children, because as I'm sure you know, younger children are more likely to end up in hospital. But what came out from that very clearly for us was that you don't have to have a child with a long-term condition to be a fairly repeat visitor to hospital. So when we asked parents which words best describe how you feel about being in hospital with your child, you'll see from the word cloud that the majority of those words are negative. So the ones that sort of come out in the top 5, worried, stressed, helpless, and scared, give you a good idea of how parents are feeling. But the most important word is the one that came top of the list by quite a long way, and that's grateful. So when you are seeing parents in hospital, there is a lot of stress, there is a lot of fear, there is a lot of confusion, but you do have the opportunity to start from that base of parents being grateful that their child is in a place where they're being looked after and cared for. Now, I apologize for how small the text is on this picture, so I'll talk you through it. But we asked parents, what are the main factors that impact on how confident you feel? And you'll see that the top 3 by quite a long way are clear communication from the hospital and medical professionals, how medical professionals speak to me or treat me, and being involved in decisions about my child's care. So for us at the charity, none of that really surprised us as parents. Those were the sort of answers that we were expecting. But what really surprised me was that 7th on the list is the quality of care my child receives in hospital. And when we dug into that a bit more, what parents told us was that they are broadly confident that if they go into an NHS hospital in the UK, their child will receive a decent quality of care. That's not what they're worried about. What they're worried about is the relationships that they have with the people who are caring for their child. So again, it's very intuitive. I suspect most of you know this, but it's really helpful to have the data to back up what we think we all know. So when you're talking to a parent in hospital, bearing in mind that sort of data background, it is really important to bear in mind that you're a factor in a much broader and more complex picture. And that's what we call the broader parental experience. So it can roughly, the complexity can roughly be grouped into sort of 3 main areas. So the first is practical. And there are lots of issues that make it just harder, practically harder for a parent to be in hospital with their child. There are lots of reasons. Some of them are listed on the slide. There's also, the difficulty perhaps of getting to hospital to see their child, the inflexibility of their work, so they can't get time off to come and spend time with their child, or they're having to work 2 jobs, which means they don't have an awful lot of time to spend in the hospital. There are just a lot of practical things that can make it harder. And a lot of parents just turning up to hospital, just being there, is a massive achievement for them in the face of a lot of practical barriers. The second is emotional. So we all need strong, consistent and appropriate emotional support as human beings, but particularly so when you're in an incredibly stressful environment like being in hospital with your child. And there are lots of places that parents can get that from, but the most important thing is that they have it. And if they don't have it, it is going to make that experience infinitely more stressful for them. And then the final point is intellectual. So do the parents have the ability to understand and contextualize what is wrong with their child and the treatment their child is being given? Now, I was incredibly lucky in this environment because I have a mother-in-law who's a doctor and a sister-in-law who's a pediatric consultant, and a husband who has a master's in biomedical engineering. So from the sort of perspective of the people around me who I could turn to and explain things to me when I didn't really understand, I was incredibly fortunate. Most people don't have that level of expertise in their lives that they can just draw upon. So most parents in hospital do find it difficult to understand the intricacies of what is going on with their child. So what do parents need for good relationships? So this is about what parents have told us that they feel they need to have good relationships with health professionals in hospital. So the very smallest bubble on here is the task, the point of contact, the point at which you, as a health professional, come into contact with a patient and their family in hospital. So that could be any number of things. It could be that you're a bedside nurse and you're coming on shift. It could be that you're there to do a blood draw. It could be that you're there during ward round. There are an almost infinite number of ways that you could come into contact with a patient and their family. But that point of contact, that first moment where a parent meets you as a health professional, is really important. And what parents are asking for at that point is, who are you and what are you doing at my child's bedside? It's not that complicated, but we as parents see so many people coming and going in a hospital environment that somebody introducing themselves, explaining who they are and what they're doing is absolutely vital for that kind of foundation of the relationship. The next bubble is the condition. So why is the child in hospital in the first place? Do you, as a health professional, know how your part of that child's care fits into the wider picture? More importantly, from the parental perspective, does the parent know? Have you explained it to them? So over and above, hi, I'm Margaret and I'm here to take your child's blood. Have you explained why? What is that blood test for? What is it going to be used for? Why? How does it fit into that bigger picture? And most health professionals stop at this point. So the vast majority of health professionals, particularly the good ones, introduce themselves, explain why they're there, explain how their task fits into the wider care, and then stop. And for most parents, over the course of a full hospital admission, this doesn't feel like enough. And what parents are also looking for, and I stress this is over the course of an admission, is, have you looked at my whole child? So not just the diagnosis, but have you actually seen a child in this bed rather than just a medical condition or a job that needs to be done? Above that, have you involved and engaged the parents? Are you proactively talking to the parents as well as to the child? And have you thought, do you have a thought in the back of your mind that there might be other things going on in this family's life? And that comes back to the parental experience slide that we've already looked at. And over the course of an admission, parents want the whole package. Now, it is completely unrealistic to expect every health professional to deliver on every element of this in every interaction that they have with parents in hospital. But there is quite a lot you as health professionals can individually do to help build the relationship, to help build the pieces of this so that parents have that good, trusting relationship with you and with the hospital as a whole. So this is our sort of virtuous circle of trust. And this is the bit about what you can do as health professionals to help build those relationships. These are the things that parents are looking for and asking for. And the more you can build these into your interactions, the greater the relationship and the trust will be with parents. And not just with you, but if you're individually building trust with parents, it really helps to build trust with the hospital as a whole, with the systems and processes surrounding their child. So what does that look like? So I'm going to go through each one in turn to give you a more specific idea of what parents are actually looking for so that you've got something tangible to take away. So communication is obviously where we're going to start because that's who we are as an organisation and our reason for existing. So as I said, introduce yourself to us, introduce yourself to our child, tell us who you are, explain why you've come to see us. Understand the basics of who that child is. And by basics, I mean basics. Know their name, know their gender, and know why they're in hospital. I cannot tell you how many health professionals turned up at my daughter's bedside and assumed she was a boy because of her name. And there is nothing that undermines a parent's confidence more than a health professional not knowing the basics about their child. You can be an absolute world expert in your field, but if you turn up and you get our child's name wrong, it is going to undermine the confidence that we have in you. Please, for the love of everything, explain acronyms, medical shorthand, and technical terms when you are talking to us. Most parents do not understand. And if you can explain in layman's terms what you're talking about, even if you have to use the technical terms when you're talking to other health professionals, using layman's terms when you're talking to parents is enormously helpful. And then thinking about what it is you actually want parents to take away from the conversation you're having with them. So if you've come in to talk to the child or the parent, what is the one thing, and reasonably expecting parents to remember one thing from an interaction is realistic. What is the one thing you want the parent to remember at the end of the interaction that you have had with them? What's the takeaway you want the parent to have? And being really clear on that, repeating it, making sure that parents understand it is really important for good communication going forward. So the second one is listening. So parents want to be listened to. And I know that this is something that Sarah talks about a lot as well, but really focusing and listening on what a parent is telling you. We know our child best. That does not mean that we know what is wrong with our child. It doesn't mean that we can do a medical diagnosis. But if our child is not well and we are telling you that there is something wrong with our child and telling you what is wrong with them from our experience, you listening to that and taking it on board makes an enormous difference to us. And asking us if we have any questions. So making that time, even if it's just 30 seconds at the end of the interaction, to ask if we have any questions or to leave space for those questions. Or if you can't do that, making sure that the parent knows how to get hold of you to ask questions later on makes a really big difference. Some parents find it really hard to process an awful lot of information. So if you're walking up to the bedside, giving them a lot of information and then sort of saying, any questions? Some parents aren't going to be able to ask questions in that moment. So explaining to them how they can get hold of you later on, even if it's just get your bedside nurse to call me. making sure that they know that there is an open route to communication going forward, and that you are prepared to listen to them and answer their questions is really valuable. Time and space is the third element. And I say this with the best will in the world, sometimes go away. So judge your moment. I know it's not always possible. Sometimes there are emergency or high pressure situations where you need to get parents to make a decision, or you need them to understand what's going on in that moment. But most of the time in hospital, parents and children are not in emergency situations. So judge your moment. Don't try and come and have a serious technical conversation with a parent when they are in the middle of breastfeeding or trying to get their child to eat lunch or in the middle of a physio session. Just think about whether or not the parent is in the right space and frame of mind to be able to have that conversation with you, and give them time to process information that you've given them, particularly if it's difficult information. So unless it is an absolute emergency, it's generally a bad idea to try and pressure parents into making decisions in the heat of the moment. Support and empathy is the fourth element. So we want to feel supported in hospital. That doesn't mean that parents should be relying on you for emotional support and as emotional props. That's not an appropriate relationship between parents and health professionals. But it does mean that we want you to ask about our child. We want you to ask about who they are. Even if it's a simple question of, what's their favorite book, or what do they like playing with, or what do they like when they're not in hospital? Partly because it gives you a better idea of how unwell that child truly is. But it also makes parents feel that they are being listened to, and that the health professional in front of them sees their child as more than just a diagnosis. And if a parent's response to your conversation with them feels weird or feels off, and there are, you will know that as health professionals better than me, sometimes you talk to parents and they are, they are unusually aggressive, they're weirdly emotional, they're weirdly unemotional. It is likely that there is something else going on in their life, and it is likely that their response to you is not actually about you. Cannot rule out that occasionally parents will take against health professionals, but generally speaking, if you're having a conversation with a parent and it feels weird and it feels off, it's probably there is something else going on in their life. Now, it may not be appropriate for you to have that conversation with them, but it's definitely worth flagging to an appropriate colleague if you have one. Some hospitals have psychology teams, perhaps to the bedside nurse, perhaps to, if you have a family liaison team, that there is a parent who looks like they need a little bit more support than they're getting. And then the final thing is being treated as an equal partner in our child's care. And while this completes the circle of trust on our little infographic, it also sort of brings me back full circle to the reason that Confident Conversations exists in the first place. So what we want is for you to be honest with us. We want you to tell us what is going on with our child, but we don't want you to be blunt. And it's a fine line, and I appreciate that. But parents want to know relevant information about their child, but they want it to be delivered with compassion. I have a particularly horrific story when my daughter lost her hand, of a registrar who turned up very late at night to tell us that absolutely my daughter would lose her arm and might possibly lose her life, and then just walked out. That is not treating a parent as an equal partner in my child's care. It was a horrific way to deliver bad news that turned out to be inaccurate. But delivering any kind of news, good or bad, with compassion is really valuable, because you don't know how a parent is going to respond to it. To you, it might feel like bad news. To a parent, it might not. So treating them as a grown-up, but understanding that they are a very stressed and very emotional grown-up is sort of the place to put parents in. And then if you're not confident that a parent understands what you're saying to them, if you want to treat them like an equal partner, but you're just not sure they're getting it, a really good tip that parents quite like is being asked to explain it back to the doctor. So instead of saying to a parent, how much of this do you actually understand, which can feel quite accusatory and can undermine parents' confidence, saying things to a parent like, for my benefit, can you explain to me what you already know? That's a really nice way of getting parents to tell you how much they actually understand about their child's condition in a way that feels much more collegiate and less accusatory. And parents want to be partners in their child's care. And we all know that outcomes for children are better when parents and health professionals work together. And you are absolutely vital to making that happen. If there's anything that you want to talk about outside of the chat, so either you're interested in working with us further as an organisation, or you've got some specific questions that you feel wouldn't be massively relevant to everyone else, do please get in touch. Simon's going to send the slides out after this, so you'll have my email address, but we also have various ways to contact us on the website. So please do get in touch if there's anything you'd like to talk about further. But in the meantime, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can go back to the chat and see what we've got from there. But please do share questions in the chat if you've got them.